Okay, I'm sitting here again with Bhavani Maki, and we are hosting the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. It's really great to be here with you, Bhavani.
Thanks, Shanae. I look forward to what queries you're cooking, and they're always good because they always leave me with a lot of inquiry as well.
Great. Well, this one I've been sitting with for a long time. I really look forward to asking this. And it starts with, I really, really want to go there. And by there, I mean, I really want to make this one precious life count. And I want to make a difference in the world. I've heard you pose the question many times, do you want enlightenment or do you want true intimacy? And it's funny because my first response when I hear this question is always, I want enlightenment. And then my second response is like, oh, wait, I mean, I want intimacy. Can I have both?
Absolutely. I believe. Yeah, I think that question helps us to discern that they're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they're deeply entwined with one another. And it really helps us to dismantle our ideas of what enlightenment is. It's really, and a lot of the gross misinterpretation has to do with, again, the hijack of yoga and spirituality to monastic communities. But really, it's so much deeper than that. It's so much more primal. It's interesting. We just opened the sadhana pada, which is the more practical chapter in the Yoga Sutras, and it's for the student whose awareness is more extroverted. They're a householder. And in our lineage, the teacher of teachers, Krishnamacharya, his teacher, I shared with in a past podcast, how at the end of his tenure with Rama Mohan Brahmacharya, his teacher exacted his recompense. And not only did he say, I want you to be a yoga teacher, when Krishnamacharya had multiple doctorates, and could have had really secure kind of jobs and very very high status kind of jobs within the spiritual and the spiritual erudition tradition. But he said, I also want you to have a family. And some of these positions actually precluded that he was brahmacharya, that he was sannyas, that he wouldn't be a householder. Now, Rama Mohan Brahmacharya, by various purports, they say he had as many as 12 children. And Krishnamacharya said that, women are the lineage holders of yoga because they're more trustworthy. Of course, these are sweeping generalizations. Please don't be offended. But also because women set the tone of harmony in the family. They're the ones who really kind of inspire. They're the motivators. So the reason that I'm sharing this is the importance of the legacy of yoga as being one of relationship, being one of, the sense of the jati and carrying the light for future generations. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says the two most challenging yogas, the first is to be a mother. It's also the highest yoga because you surrender your body as you knew it. I mean, you basically become a host. I remember my yoga student who was my OB, and she said, yeah, it's basically a parasite on your body. And then she laughed and she said, for the next 20 years. So you become a host. There's certain things that mothers can do, like give birth and nurse, that others can't. So that's very challenging. And then the second most challenging is relationship. Now, if you're fortunate enough to not just choose because of pheromones and oxytocin, but there's some real connection and some commitment there, you're really sorting through things on the intimate level. And I know in my own relationship that my husband is very learned in many different modalities of the metaphysics and yoga, as am I. And there's the aspect of the super spiritual ego. For the super spiritual ego, you have some kind of meme or quote or shloka or shastra or sutra for any situation. But then as far as how it penetrates us, when we have that kind of interface with another person, if we have self-awareness, it becomes self-reflective, right? That person becomes the guru, they become the mirror for us. And we're going to see where, we've erected barriers, or where our triggers are. I know in my personal relationship, what attracted me the most to my husband now is one of the kind of like spurs under the saddle where it can be a challenge. So we can see that tendency to be black and white in our thinking. So, the other thing is you can't change anybody else's mind as much as you try to. That was hard-won wisdom. Okay. Hard-won wisdom for me. And I thought, oh my God, I've been trying to change my husband's mind. I can't do that. What do I have power over? And having respect for somebody else's timing. So then, that aspect of vyuttana manas, where our energy is going outwards and trying to shift things that we don't have control over, we're faced with ourselves, And it's such a powerful, potent, and difficult process to discern and ascertain what is a soul's desire and what's a longing and what we can give ourselves, what is overreaching, what is just another form of things not being good enough in our minds that we're creating another barrier. So we start to develop intimacy with ourselves and find those interior longings. And it's said that someone who is awakened has really developed intimacy with themselves. So they're aware of where, the vasana, the wound is, the wish behind the wound, the deep longing. They're aware of where there's just basically vritti or interference happening in their minds. It's maybe a diatribe that has become entrenched within our neurology, and to start to listen inwards. Yoga practice is so beautiful that way because, when we're not just thinking through our practice, it is a highly technological process. So we do need to understand how to do the poses in a way that supports our physiology for homeostasis and clear mind, clear heart connection. But then when we can get out of the mind, when we're practiced enough, and hopefully it's being introduced to us where there's the foundation is our breath, because when we're in our breath, we're with all of life. And our breath never lies. It always reveals. So when we get intimate with that, we can see where, okay, here's my threshold. And it's that feeling of like, I really want to do it, as you were expressing, that there's somewhere I want to get to or somewhere I want to go to. I really believe yoga is being on that threshold all the time and opening new doors. So can we have alignment? can we have enlightenment unless we have intimacy? And it's a very, very rare thing, Shanae. The capacity for intimacy. And that is a primal longing. Those of us who want it, are really doing the work to, we can imagine like the peel of the onion, how thin it is and how easily it adheres to surfaces. This peeling back, as Patanjali says, it's an endless process. Because when we're in true intimacy, we're always discovering parts of ourself and parts of another. And self becomes the capital S, in which it's like there's no bounds. So that ability to be transparent, to be connected to that primal longing is indicative that I love what oh no, I'm trying to remember his name now. He's an Irish poet. It'll come to me, but I've read this to you before in his latest publication, David White, about, it's so close. It's so close. It's already here. It's within reach. So yeah, intimacy, I believe, is the precursor. It's the prerequisite for getting lightened up. And in the Sūtra class yesterday, at the end, one of the students was sharing how she's working with a sponsor in the 12-step program. And in that first sutra, Tapaḥ svādhyāyeśvarapraṇidhānāni Kriyā Yoga. Practical yoga and practice is tapas. The first ingredient is you got to be in touch with your ache, with your longing. This is what is the inner fire that fuels us. And it's about conserving your energy. So seeing where you get wrapped up in the spirals and the vritti, the story that just continues to play itself over and over again. And eventually it's like going into a movie theater and you're like, oh my God, I've seen this whole movie. I'm going to leave now. Then we can open, a new storyline, or we can have, creativity within our story. So, seeing where our energy is being sucked into these spirals. Sometimes certain relationships are just so unreciprocal or combative or flat that we might even pull out of that relationship. That might be another person. It might be the relationship with the theme that keeps replaying in our mind, right? And we can reappropriate that energy towards like piercing ourselves, getting deep, like, what is this feeling? And, what am I not seeing? How am I creating a barrier between myself, and is the longing an expression of the receiving? It's like we have to put the call out. And then svādhyāya means one's own and one's sweetness. So through our own self-examination, and sometimes, it's like that story keeps playing, and then we have to be really aware of the mind's obsessive tendencies. The mind tends to obsess. And then, these longings are very real, but when we can see like, oh my God, I know what the story does. It just spins me out. And if I go down that rabbit hole, it's like you almost get inebriated by it and then hung over. Like it's unkind. So there's a certain point, we have to lance the wound and go into it. But then there's a certain point where we seal it and we don't need to excavate because we know that we've gone to depths with it, and it's a way of rewounding ourselves. So that's svādhyāya. And also this implies, studying the lives of luminaries, of those who rose above their difficult circumstances and really championed certain values or certain character aspects, like Martin Luther King, and they championed it. And even Gautama Buddha, in the moment before his enlightenment, he was confronted by these inner demons. Why am I doing this? Am I doing this because I want to be enlightened? Because I want to be, glitterati enlightened, or I want other people to see me be enlightened, or, why am I doing this? And when it's really for the act of intimacy, that sense of being a bodhisattva, where, I don't want just this for myself. I want others to have it so we can all really enjoy the abundance and this Goldilocks planet and this Goldilocks incarnation, right? And then I.2 is that trustful surrender into something bigger. That love is going to be bigger than we had imagined it. So, yoga is a practice of intimacy. And I remember, I even wrote it in my book, the ideas that we have around enlightenment. I was raised really classically. And of course it was, in the East, this is where it's tricky because we're taking Eastern metaphysics into a Western culture. And so there's a different lens. It said that Samādhi, or super paranormal consciousness, is the goal. But then it also says it's grace. It's not something you can do. There's actually a letting go that allows that to happen. And isn't that the process of intimacy? Is one of letting go. And it can be very scary to let go. We think, well, if I let everything go, I'm going to be left empty. But then we see that our essence is already there, that what you really need can't be let go of because it's who you are. It's your mission. It's your vision. Yeah. So we're going to all be faced with that. And, having somebody who loves you and is committed enough where you can have those difficult conversations and where you can own your own longing and you can say your longings without them becoming defensive. Well, that's quite a journey, isn't it? I don't believe they're mutually exclusive. I believe they're inclusive. And that's why I pose that question. And it usually you can see people have a full body vritti who haven't, who saw the two as exclusive. So perhaps, we can only, hypothesize where that comes from. But I have a feeling it comes from the sense of the monastic tradition that the two are mutually exclusive. But they're not.
Yeah. And that ache, that deep ache doesn't ever seem to go away. And I'm not sure that I want it to, but sometimes it's really hard to bear.
Yeah. This is where yoga is so much about unwinding the trauma. And everybody has had trauma to some extent. That's already been scientifically proven, if you want to look at that. And that trauma touches every part of our life. So the trauma never goes away, but our relationship to it changes. And in some ways, that's what keeps us as empathic beings. It's part of our collective nervous system and paying attention. It's kind of what we need to have as a bodhisattva. But rather, and I've spoken about this, rather than moving from the wound, we speak to the wound. We heal the wound in the way that we're moving. So we're informed, we have intimacy with it, with us, but there's a whole different neurology that occurs when we're moving from trauma versus when we're moving from reconciled trauma. We're going to have the triggers. This is actually the next sutra in the mentorship. Svādhyāyeśvarapraṇidhānāni klesha tanū karaṇārthaś. That what we're doing is we're tanū, which is the thinning of the involuntary drivers or the cords, where we've got hooks. And some hooks are deep, some go back generations, some are ubiquitous within our culture. And so our ability to get those hooks out or see where those cords are pulling on us, and the practical aspect of yoga described in the second pada or chapter is how we can use the bottom to top therapies of asana and pranayama to see, it's like in yoga, we want to feel where that threshold is, where things start to shake. And the shaking, if we're really skilled, shaking is a way that we unwind trauma that's held in our tissues. And you'll see animals do that. They just shake, they unwind it, to use our breath so that we're able to gain comfort in an area that used to put us into fight or flight or freeze. So we're learning, and by thinning these attachments or drivers, this is samadhi, homeostasis, reclaiming your wholeness. Depending on where you're at, it's self-regulation, so that we can touch things that were too difficult to touch. And so samadhi is a result of thinning those cords so that they don't create such a volatile reaction. And as my teacher Ramajati would say, of reverting trauma back to pure prana. So something that would send us spiraling maybe for weeks, eventually might just take a few days, might just take a few hours, might take a few breaths. And then eventually we can see the spiral like, oh my God, if I start obsessing over that, I'm digging my own grave. I'm not going to do that to myself anymore because it's unproductive. I'm not going to participate in this. It's unproductive. And it just is a form of self-sabotage. So can I trust that there's a way out of this? I don't know it. I don't see it. But that love, and love in that action of, okay, I'm going to sit with this. And rather than udara, have full-blown reactions, erect defense mechanisms, I'm going to be able to just hold that space. And most important is feeling into our state again. Yoga's chitta vritti nirodha, like what is my state? Unless it's literally, like a lot of times we create a situation as being urgent and critical. And that's something I really had to learn, was that when I was in trauma, I would create an urgency around something that wasn't really urgent. So looking at that, and then when I could drop in and chill out, suddenly I would see like all these other possibilities. And sometimes it took a little bit of time. So yeah, being able to get calm, get quiet, even though these are pressing issues or they're deep interior longings that can't be excised, to relax into that place, relax into that struggle that's pulling on you, and know that it's growing. And then it's a good time to pray. And there's different ways of praying. There's gratitude. And then there's also just saying, I don't know. I don't know. Please help me to be patient. Please help me to see the gifts that I'm not seeing. And really calling that in is an opening of our minds and our hearts. And this is when that deeper voice of prajna, of innate wisdom, awakens. But how do we get there? It's usually like hidden under all these accretions of the scarring, the callousness, the defense mechanisms. First and foremost, we have to identify what our defense mechanisms are. And then it's really powerful when we say them out loud and confess them, especially with a partner, because you're detonating the bomb. It's not going to work anymore. Yeah.
I just wanted to go back to the thing you said about udara. Is that one of the states of attention?
It is, excuse me. It's one of the states of the klesha. So we have prasupta, which we know supta from the asanas. It means supine or sleeping or dormant. And depending on the translator and depending on the student and where they are in their evolution of their nervous system and their psyche, it might mean that it's repressed, or it might mean that it's neutralized, but it has the potential to rear its head again. So this is considered to be the most like it's a very unstable state for those who have repressed it, because things that you can't push them down. I always think about like in the water, you can't submerge something. It's gonna pop up eventually, you know, the dead bodies, the skeletons in the closet, etc. So it will come up in different ways. And Patanjali, as an Ayurvedic physician, says this is what can reveal as disease. And people have had quantum healings when they were able to track it back to these initial wounds and really get in touch with it. A lot of things get suppressed. You know, we might even look back at our own history and realize that there's huge gaps in what we remember. There's certain years that are just very vague and shut out. Then we have udara, which is like, you know, the pressure's building. It's like the mantle on the earth. And there's all this stuff percolating underneath, and there's a crack in the surface, and there's a full-blown eruption. You know, becoming argumentative, combative, defensive, offensive, highly reactionary, but at least the pressure is being relieved. And when we can see something full-blown, we're maybe more likely to identify it. And by identifying it, you know, there's neuroscience behind this as well. Viveka Kyati means we put a name on it, we can get a handle on it. Like, oh, this is triggering my fear. And we might ask, well, what is this fear? What is fear? You know, how does it present in my bodies? And that might put us in the Vichina phase, which is the pendulum swinging to extremes, where, you know, we might think that we're working through something, but we're suppressing it. I mean, it's not always clear. It's, we have to be in it to develop that clarity. So Vichina would be the extreme behavior. It could be the person who has serial relationships, who it's like we're just going from one extreme to the other, but really those poles of opposites are the same pattern. And then tanū is the phase where, as I spoke about earlier, where we're like, oh, I'm being triggered. Here it is. Do I want to like freak out and do that violence to myself because I know it's not helpful most of the time? Granted, there are certain situations which are really urgent and we need those responses and reactions, but most of the time it isn't. Most of the time it's self-induced. It's that pressure building in us. So, okay, I have all these tools that I learned to work with in yoga. How can I find homeostasis? And I know that is unproductive. What might be more productive? So that's the tanū phase. And eventually, let's see if I can remember the Sūtra here. Hang on a second. I remember the end. Samskaro nyasheshaha. That the only residue that remains is this samskara of nirodha, which is the ability to quickly self-regulate and realize there's possibilities we haven't imagined. So, it's learning to cooperate with life. There's always solutions at hand that maybe we just haven't tried out. Then it's said when that becomes kind of our normal state that we realize, okay, well, there is things work out in the end. And each crisis is an opportunity, and we often only see it in hindsight. But I know that because it's proven to be true. And even though this situation, I can't see it, there is something new that is coming out of this molten, hot, like murky, viscous situation. Something's being created that's never been seen. And I know that to be true. I know that there is a rhythm, an order underneath it all that I can't understand intellectually. And then it said that we're jivana mukta, we're free to function. So maybe a good way to kind of like titrate this down is being able to discern, like, all right, which functions are dysfunctional and which ones are functional, and being in that place of I don't know, and I can be okay that I don't know, but I'm going to ready myself so that when opportunities arise, I'm not going to miss out on them. I'm going to see them. Yeah, and tanū is in so many names of the postures, right? It's woven throughout the asana names. And I love the way that Ramajati would translate it as to go beyond prior self-imposed limitation. Self-imposed, certainly there was some kind of a projection or modeling on us, but eventually we want to develop personal sovereignty and be really clear and conscientiously adopt these methodologies, know when it's time to use them, know when it's time to put the bicycle away and pull out the kayak when you're navigating this kind of terrain. So to have that skill and have that quiver of tools rather than just being triggered into a certain modality. And that requires intimacy, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Thank you for going over that. Again, it leads quite nicely into my next question about the mind. Excuse me, but I want to just back up for a moment and go over this word klesha, because often as I hear it translated, it has a negative connotation. But as I'm learning, with the language of triggers, is that they're not actually bad. They're learning opportunities. But I think in our language, sometimes it's very limited in the way it like wants to place like this is good and this is bad over here. And I wonder if you can maybe reframe the word klesha or give it a little bit more nuance.
Yeah, so klesha means that something kind of like rubs you the wrong way, what we think to be the wrong way. And we're here to individuate. And again, we've had this modeling, and so there's all of these unspoken kind of narratives about how we should be, what yoga should look like, that I'm going to be unaffected by the world. I'll be floating on this lotus above this cesspool of consensus consciousness. And then we go, oh my God, like this work is messy and I can't just do a posture or chant a mantra without really touching my interior self, or I'm alienating parts of myself. So klesha, we have kind of like this persona that we're building, and certainly social media has aggravated that. We can be very careful with filters, how we present ourselves. But like as far as our interior being, that's really what we're discovering through this process of penetration. So klesha is where something creates friction. And that first word, tapas again, which is that inner fire, that deep longing for authenticity, for intimacy, for connection with self, with others. How do you start a fire? But with friction. So in that first sutra, Patanjali says, unless you're in touch with your pain, you're really not going to go far in yoga. I mean, maybe you'll get great buns or abs, or have skill with your breath retention and things like that. But as far as the interior, our capacity for capacity, our capacity for love to grow us, to stretch us, when we think we have nothing left, is often when that grace comes in and we're like, wow, I'm never going to run out of love. It's an infinite field I can tap into. So the klesha are, the frictious aspects of life that are here to actually help us to kind of like sand off the rough corners. I always feel like it's work, eventually it's like working with the grain, the heart, to bring out the heart of the wood. And we have to use that friction and that tapas very gently. It's like, eventually the sandpaper becomes finer and finer. It's just part of life. It's part of the diversity. My 9-year-old son, he's in that phase of individuating, and he goes, not everybody likes the same thing and not everybody feels the same way. And it's like, yeah, you're right. He says, if it did, the world would be very boring. And here it is out of the mouth of babes. So this is what gives us contrast, diversity. We grow through relationship, and yoga ultimately is relationship. So a lot of people, I remember reading Baba Haridas, Babaji's book on the Samādhi sadhana pada. And, this is like maybe 12 years ago. And it goes through the kleshas. And he said, even when you're realized, even when you're awake, the kleshas never go away. And I was like, oh no, oh my God. And it was kind of like one of these reality checks. We think things are going to be different when we get over there. But really, it's our relationship to things that change. And in those critical moments is what really grows and expands and is the test of our integration and our creativity and our courage with calmness, that we can find that. So they're never going away, Shanae.
I hope that's a good thing.
Good thing. And what was revealed in yesterday's Sūtra mentorship class was that so someone who has this inner fire and who is in touch with their pain and is willing to sit with it rather than trying to sit on it or project it onto others, or to get away from it because it just chases us, that they're called a tapasvin, or the feminine is tapasvini. So they're really like willing to work with this stuff because they know it holds power and it holds healing. That when the teaching was that when someone insults them or criticizes them, they respond with thank you because it builds compassion. Perhaps it also means when these afflictions arise, we can also say thank you. Okay, there's some part of me that I'm going to discover that I wouldn't unless I was being pressurized. And it's really hard to do that at times. And maybe it's just a 1% of our field of our sentiment. But, that's the sense of like committed devotion and trusting in the unknown. Trusting that there's a bigger force that's evolving us, that's sustaining us, and that resolves all these situations. That shraddha, we're not ignoring it, we're inviting it in, we're calling it in. And then there's a matter of timing. It's not always like this. It might be a long, tedious process. That ratio begins to expand, and we can be like, I'm 49% scared shitless, and I'm 51% like, I know that I don't know, and I'm open to resolution.
I love that. I love that simple act of saying thank you, because it's often, sometimes it's easier to deal with other people and things outside of ourselves. And maybe we're really good at dealing with challenging conversations, or, we're being intimate with another. And yet when it's turned back inside and one's looking at their own mind, sometimes I find, especially for myself, that I can be so hard on myself. And what are some other tools that we can use to cultivate that discernment and ultimately love and real intimacy with ourselves?
It's really hard because we're such a instant gratification, DIY kind of a culture, which, is wonderful. And a lot, like, none of these things are terrible, but there's this sense of wanting to fix things and check them off of our list. So being able to really honor and embrace that emotion, like, there's the story, there's the real problem, there's the real issue that you're trying to sort out. But then again, there's like our state. And can you sit with that state without trying to fix it or go into the story, and feel where it's held in your body? Like, where am I feeling this? Where does my breath stop? Where do I feel like all of my energy is getting stuck? What is this feeling? I'm angry, and underneath that anger is frustration, and underneath that frustration is impatience, and underneath that impatience is sadness, and underneath that sadness is longing, and underneath that longing is intimacy and healing. So really being able to sit with it. And I know for me, when I'm in it, it can be really challenging because I just want to, my head wants to wrap it up in the story. So I've really learned to, through many different techniques, and certainly the pelvic floor is where trauma really reveals. It really does. So if we can get our breath all the way down there, and sometimes, there's going to be some convulsive, like blubbering or sobbing or whatever that happens. And just like, what do I need right now? And then maybe even, like when do I remember first feeling this feeling? And I can see myself at that age, whatever it was, and kind of embrace that part of myself. So really going to the root, until we go to that root in the sadhana pada, let's see, he talks about it as the klesha, the karma, the sati multad vipaka chakti ayur bhogaha. Mula means the source. So until we touch the source of it, as much as we feel like we work through things, or we might even feel like we're in a groove, in a good space in the moment, it's going to come up for us because it's unmetabolized. So being able to touch that part of ourself and be aware of it, and it's like we're taking that part of ourself under our wing. The wings being abhyasa, which is checking the downward pull, like, oh my God, I'm starting to obsess, I'm starting to spiral. This is unkind to myself. Like, I'm hurting myself. I'm taking the wound and I'm continuing to hurt myself. Or I'm projecting it onto somebody else, and I'm bleeding all over this other person in a way that isn't productive. And then vairagya is to have clarity with the different colors or the different moods, let go of the story, and to really hold that mood with clarity. And here's the thing, it's like we're like spiritual beings living in an animal body in a physical world. This is part of our aliveness that we can like enjoy, not necessarily but experience. We're free to function and use those emotions to inform us, but hopefully, eventually in a present way. And Carl Jung said that 70% of what we're feeling right now has nothing to do with this moment, right? So as we start to clear through that stuff, we're going to see where, the wheel of karma is really rotating we're either in reaction or inaction. So like, how do we get to the center and see where we're hyperactive and where we're frozen, and hold ourselves in a bigger context? So very practically, I'll just like, for me, I'll be like, oh my God, I'm up here, or, in my head, or I'm blocked in my heart. I'll just feel myself start to land. Okay. What is the surface I'm sitting on? What's underneath that? What does it feel like? How is my weight landed? Where am I pulled up in hypertension? How can I drop into that? And then, when I can do that, what is the feeling behind this? When did I first feel this? Can I hold that part of myself? Because the trauma is when you were helpless. There was nothing you can do. And now I'm not 7 years old or 17 years old or 37 years old. I can bring myself into the present moment. And if you recall, we've played with that question. This is sometimes what I'll do too, is like, what would I have told my younger self? You're going to get through this. You're going to be okay. It's going to be okay. So self-soothing, and sometimes crying is a big part of that. Like that's the unwinding process. So, it's messy, the soul is messy. It's sticky. It's like putting your hand in compost. There's all these smells and textures, but that's the raw stuff that we can cultivate and be nourished from. And knowing that it's hard to see it in the moment. I'm having a breathing. I'm having a moment. It's going to arc. It's peaking, and then it's going to drop.
Thank you so much. Yeah, thank you for mentioning that it's messy and it's not easy. And it's like I was thinking that you say sometimes that we live in a problem addicted world. And I just thought that comes along with we live in a want to fix it world, addiction to wanting to fix it. So yeah, and like sitting with that messiness and with handfuls of compost. I love that. Just, dirt and just, because from that something grows, something can grow, but something also has to be let go of.
Yeah. And, even something simple as like, they have like an acronym, HALT. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? So that's where it's like, you can even see yourself as that strung out toddler. It's like, okay, it's time to have a little something to eat. It's time to relax, or it's time to get outside and move my body a little bit. Or for those whose inertia is they're constantly moving, it's time to just lay down and or take a bath or go for a swim, get in nature or call a friend. And instead of unloading, spend some time with somebody else, because we can get so lost in our own diatribe. So just go, like taking I know you love to ride your bike, right? Like riding a bike is so wonderful because there's just so much prana and the smells and the movement that you're feeling. There's so many ways that we can, just do something that gives us a larger frame and experience. So self-care is really important. And that's also one of those misinterpretations of tapas, is this self-abnegation, this penance. It's like, this the hair shirt or the self-flagellation. But really it's a gentle process of like, okay, how can I feed this fire? Is it burning too hot? How can I temper it down? How can I be kind to myself and really conserve my energy so that it's utilized in a way that keeps that inner light going? Self-care is huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So take us off the beaten path toward breakthrough experience. Take me there. Can you describe breakthrough experience? Because also I want to just add that, off the beaten path to me is way more interesting and brings a whole lot more curiosity than the clearly defined way.
Yeah. We're all unique individuals, and we're all, have it's like, this is where it's so great with the sutras, because we can see where our issues, when they're distilled down or titrated down, we're all struggling with same core issues, but the combination, the ratios, there's so many different elements within ourselves and within our lives and our spheres, that it's unique to everybody. So as much as we can, Patanjali says, it's like, I can give you these general terms, but ultimately it's your own experience and it's your own adventure about discovering like your own peculiar and particular needs and self, because everybody brings a piece and a part, everybody has that. So it's natural that we're going to have to, learn and study under the tutelage of somebody who hopefully has been raised and taught, because there's a modeling, we don't have that self-awareness to really watch ourselves. And then eventually it just also becomes a great, we see what a blessing it is to have somebody who said, oh yeah, I've been through that. I remember talking to Rama and I was like, I'm really struggling with this. And she didn't seem to struggle with it. And she said, well, I did too, but you have to realize that I'm older than you. I went through that. So that sense of like, yeah, you're going to, even the transits, like, oh, you're going through this transit. And that's a natural progression in your own evolution. So as much as it's mapped out and as much as we can have companions, it's a very individual experience. And we're going to have to find our own way, It's like, how this isn't really addressing me, or this isn't really working for me. And it might be a reframing of an idea or a little tweak. The breakthrough that happens is, it's that sense of insight where we see a pattern that we hadn't recognized before. And by seeing that pattern, it's like we have a different sense of perspective. So then we're like, oh my God, there it is. This is where I've just been spinning my wheels and stuck in a rut, and I felt stunted. Maybe I'm going to try this. I'm going to leverage this in a different way. So it's really that reframing experience. And, the sutra, that's the integration. I mean, without the practice, the sutra are helpful, but the practice is how we authenticate, these teachings and personalize them for ourselves. But they're going to give us a perspective, and then ultimately, we got to work it out. We have to sort it out about what works for us and what doesn't. And that breakthrough is being able to be like, oh my God, this is something that I kind of hid in the shadows, because I didn't want people to realize like how much I'm struggling. It doesn't look good, people will maybe question my capacity, my viability. So when we see that in the sutras, it's like, oh my God, this isn't personal to me. And then the Sangatas, where we have these discussions, and through the discussion, we pull the wisdom out of each other. Somebody may say something in a way where it's like, oh my God, that really lands for me. And so that breakthrough is just seeing where you lived in a very confined perspective or reality, and seeing that there's a different approach that you can do things. So it's like maybe I've been using the hammer upside down all this time, and wow, I could turn it over. I could do this, and really, really learning how to have skill. So that's the breakthrough is the neural patterning where we get stuck in a loop, and rather than just recycling, or reverting to that loop, we can sit with it, sit with the emotion or sit with whatever it is, sit with the discomfort. And there's new pathways that start to open for us. It's a really hard thing to talk about.
It is, but
I hope it was effective.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, I want that. I don't know what that is, but I want that.
Yeah, and you got it, but again, it's like this weight, this burden that we should have it all figured out. And if we don't, there's something severely wrong with us. And as I've mentioned before, there's also this fad about not having anything figured out and really like festering in the wound. And, when we can get beyond that victim perpetrator and see, as Patanjali says, like the rough edges, the kleshas, the frictious energies we experience, they're a way of polishing us, of getting clear. When we have those crises is when we have to really, like, we don't have the choice to avoid in the same way. And those critical choices, sometimes they have to happen in a moment. In some ways, that's almost better than having to ruminate over it for a long time. But we can tap into like our gut knowing, and that's the shining. We can shine, we can feel that shine, that luster of our own resilience, and by doing that, we make the world shine. So really, I love how if we just like follow like what we love, what inspires us, what we're curious about, it helps us to do that. We want to do that on like, and then in those crisis moments, can we, it's like, wow, this is really potent for me. There's a lot of energy that's bundled up here. How can I reappropriate this energy in a way that is like gonna break down the self-imposed barriers, break down the belief systems, break down the agenda? And what am I holding on to? Like, what's got a hold on me as far as like what is really interior that, it's like the love languages. What do I really need? I want intimate connection through time or through touch or, all of those things. Like, what do I really need? And to see what isn't going to let go of you as well. That's really, that's a wonderful adventure. And you have to remind yourself sometimes, because Patanjali says you should struggle. Everybody thinks it should be easy. No, you should be struggling with this stuff. So when we can take off the guilt around that and be like, okay, yeah, this is a struggle. It's not easy. I've got to really do some soul searching. And I maybe even have like a map of how it should be, but it's probably not going to be that way. I don't have to figure it all right now, but I can figure out what feels right. And that may not be easy either. There's this real attachment to this sloth and the comfort. But there is that aspect of like, where is our growing edge? It takes time to develop that kind of devotion, but the more that we're aware of it, the more it's strengthened, and we can just hold these issues in balance. And all we need is 51%.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's such a good reminder that it's not supposed to be easy.
And struggle can have a lot of gradations also, right? Then eventually it's just like maybe the dance in Tai Chi, right? That there's movement happening.
anything else you want to say to from today's conversation?
Like to realize that it's not easy, but that doesn't mean that it has to be terrible. That it can be a wonderful creative process. And if, I remember I was sharing sutras many years ago in Portland, Oregon, and there was a psychologist and we were talking about the kleshas, and she said it, this was so, now it's kind of become part of the common nomenclature, which is wonderful as we're becoming more aware of how to work with trauma. Like trauma didn't even exist in the, I think it's the DMS is the psychology tome. Like 20 years ago, it wasn't even acknowledged. Now it's really acknowledged that it's at the root of most of our challenges, right? The self-induced challenges. And this woman, she said, what I really learned through offering over 30 years of therapy is the nature of our resilience. So we have this feeling like, oh my God, I'm gonna futz it up, I'm gonna screw it up, I'm gonna make the wrong choice, I'm gonna destroy everything. That's really not the case. That's the black and white thinking. And that, things rarely, when we have a blueprint of how things should be and life doesn't match up against it, that's what we call challenge. But actually we can really, there's, that's the element of puja. We become so literal in our understanding, but there's magic, there's timing, there's coalescence, there's divine providence, there's all of these elements that happen. The sutra really speak about that. And to, when you look up magic, it means working with natural forces with intention. So if we can learn to, it's kind of like working with that when you're in a state, when you're in an agitated or aggravated state, if we can whittle things down to the core longing, we're going to realize that it's nothing that we can really put our hands on, that it's, it's an Ishta Devata, which is a shining quality or attribute that we want to experience, and that we already have that, but it's something that we haven't like pulled out of the archives. So we can go like, what is it? What is the interior thing that I'm really longing for? How can I give that to myself? Not that you can give it all to yourself, but you can certainly give it. And then that acts as like a magnet that opens the doorway that says, yeah, like I'm resonating at this frequency. And we start to pull in that harmonic in ourselves. So really, we tend to overcomplicate things. We're in a lot of ways really simple beings. And that's part of the tapas as well, is whittling it down to what it's not a turning away from, but it's an embracing of what what really matters to you and what you're really longing for. It's and being patient. Just because I want it right now doesn't mean it's going to necessarily happen on the grosser plane immediately, but I can cultivate it on the subtle plane, and then that will start to take form. And at the root of patience is trust. All good things in all good time.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for these salient and potent questions. Calm for me too.
Till next time.
Aloha. Breathe.